Welcome to all Caribbean entrepreneurs. If you've been ready and waiting to take your business digital and get paid online while you sip something strong on the beach, this podcast is for you. We'll hear from the Caribbean's finest entrepreneurs on topics like e-commerce, business development, brand building, social media, their wins and failures. This is the only place in the region helping you navigate the digital age from the Caribbean's perspective. This is Digipreneur FM. And now, let's give it up for the Digiboss himself, Mr. Karan Rose.
Thank you to everybody tuning in to another episode of the Digipreneur FM podcast. And as usual, it is your boy, Mr. Rose. DJ, you gotta fade us all the way out. Because we gotta talk to the people. It is December 7th, episode 112. Ooh, we're winding down to the end of the year, folks. How was your 2022? I hope it was fun. I hope you guys are closing out the year strong or closing out the year with rest. Rest is also very productive, and I feel like 2023 is going to be a major year. So, I mean, listen, if you did not achieve everything you wanted to achieve, or even if you did, rest up because we're going to be starting again very, very soon. You're going to need all the energy that you can. Take this time to reflect. Think about what you need to get done for the next year. If you have the strength and ability to do some things right now to set you up for the next year, then, hey, take those opportunities. But if not, now is the time to relax, reflect, and think about what you got to do to have a stellar 2023. I know for me, next year is really going to be big on the health tip. I need to focus back on my health journey. And I started off amazing this year. Dropped about 20 pounds, and then life happened. Life got busy, and you're on the road, and you're just doing the absolute most. So next year, that's going to be my big focus, is going to be on finding that, not just health, but finding the balance between, being a high performer and then also balancing health. So that's going to be the journey for next year for me, striking that balance. I think in years prior, because I was, in survivor mode, in that survival mode where you're just focusing on trying to build, trying to secure the bag, trying to do everything you can so that, you're not struggling to pay your bills and you're finding your way, navigating, building your business. You tend to obsess about that until you get out of that survival mode. And I think this year for me, this was the first year where I was like, you know what? I'm not in survival mode. I mean, I'm not rich, but I'm good. Like, I'm okay. Like, things are being paid for. I can do what I need to do without any headache or worry about, where money is coming from. I don't feel like I'm in that survival mode. And I think, maybe I got to dedicate an episode to, actually, no, I probably would not dedicate an episode. But I think a conversation needs to happen around, just the stress, the decision making, the feelings that we have and that we go through when you are in survival mode. The decision making that happens when you're in that place of just trying to make it, just trying to survive. The decision making that happen, you got to be forgiven. You got to be able to forgive yourself for the decisions you make during that time, because it's not always the best decisions. A lot of them are short-sighted. A lot of them might not be the best decisions, And just the ease and grace that you have when you are no longer in that survival mode is just, it's everything, especially as somebody who, if you're building a business, you need to have that calm, cool, and collective mind. Um, and you approach your business and you approach life completely different when you are not in that survivor mode. So for me, I feel like, this year was that year where I was like, yeah, I don't, I'm not struggling. I don't feel like I'm in that place where you're just trying to figure out where the next dollar is coming from, and you have all these worries, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bills, and it's a lot of stress. It's a lot of pressure. So for me, the gym took a backseat during that time period because I'm like, yo, any amount of energy that wasn't spent focused on building what I'm trying to build, it felt like just a waste. Like it felt like it felt like when I'd be doing anything else, it felt like I was guilty. Like I was doing it with guilt. I was doing it with a heavy heart. Like, yo, why am I here when I could be home working on this thing? Or what am I doing here? I need to be in a book. I need to be doing something that's going to help me progress. So this year I didn't feel that. So now for me, next year is going to be, striking that balance between, fatherhood, gym, health, wealth, being the better business owner, and striking that balance and seeing what that balance could mean like for me. Obviously, that balance is going to look like for everybody, but now I could approach that balance with ease and grace, and I don't feel that guilt like I've felt over the years where, if I can't earn my income, how am I going to pay for the gym? How am I going to pay for my kids' school fees and all the other things that are associated with it? How am I going to live? How are these bills going to get paid if I can't, if my income isn't secure? So yeah, man, that's gonna be my journey for next year. Is learning how to strike that balance with a lot more ease and grace, and just creating that life where I feel fulfilled in all aspects of my life, and I don't feel like I'm sacrificing anything. So yeah, that's gonna be my journey for next year. So, anyways. Today's episode, let's get into that. So today's episode, number 112. This is an episode we're going to be pulling from, so you guys know every single Friday, I have the show called The Digital World. Now, I haven't had an episode, I haven't had a show in the last 2 weeks because of World Cup. World Cup has been happening during my afternoon slot, so 12 to 3 every single Friday on 106.5 FM, or if you go to the Freedom 106.5 website, you're going to be able to watch the live stream. But if you're here in Trinidad and Tobago, or you have any one of the apps that you can listen to radio on in Trinidad, 106.5 every single Friday, 12 to 3 is me on The Digital World. And we're talking all things business, digital strategies, e-commerce, marketing, entrepreneurship. And we interview a lot of other entrepreneurs as well around different topics. And I wanted to pull an episode that we did a couple of weeks ago where we interviewed Melissa Noel. Melissa Noel is a writer for Essence magazine. She also writes for the National Geographic magazine as well, and a host of other platforms. And she has done such an amazing job. So she lives in the States. She's Guyanese, so big ups to the Guyanese people. She's done some amazing work with her platform. She's been featured on places like the Huffington Post, CBS, the Caribbean Beat magazine, the Griot, Ebony magazine, ABC News, Good Morning America, World News Tonight. She's created some amazing stories on culture, race, travel, immigration, climate change, mental health, and just how to grow the African diaspora, right? She had an amazing piece that did amazing on NBC News, where she reported and produced two innovative and award-winning stories on black and undocumented immigrants that came over to the U.S., and also a piece called "Love in a Barrel" about Jamaica's barrel children, Caribbean migration, and mental health. So barrel children, is that phrase where your parents might have gone abroad and you're still living back home in the Caribbean, and they would send barrels back to you with all the goodies, with all the supplies that you would need, but your parents are away working. So that has had some effects on thousands of families throughout the years. Anyways, we spoke with Melissa Noel on talking about how Caribbean entrepreneurs can gain international attention. Like if you wanted to pitch to an Essence, to a National Geographic, to an NBC, and you wanted to get featured on these platforms, how would you go about doing it? So we had an amazing conversation with Melissa Noel. This happened over on the Digital World on Freedom 106.5. I'll link to that so you guys can also check out the episode or check out future episodes on Freedom 106.5. All right, I'll link to that in the show notes. But I thought it was an amazing conversation that I wanted to share with you guys to get this conversation more exposure. Because, again, we in the Caribbean, we have a voice, we have a message, we have some amazing entrepreneurs. And if we can start getting onto these international platforms, obviously it's going to help us, right? But there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it. There are things you need to do to garner that international attention. There are things you need to have in place. There's a way to reach out to these people. So why not learn how to do it from one of the top reporters and contributors and writers that we have coming right out of the Caribbean, working for Essence, contributing to National Geographic. Why not reach out to her and have this conversation? So let's dive right into it. This is Melissa Noel. I'll also link to her website as well, so you guys can go and check her out and follow her over on social media. She has some amazing, amazing content. And yeah, reach out to her, right? But yeah, this is the episode with Melissa Noel from the Digital World on 106.5 FM. Let's get to it.
It's time for us to introduce our special guest for today. Let's not get distracted. Today we're talking building global recognition and the art of storytelling with Melissa Noel, who is an award-winning journalist. Now, Melissa is an award-winning international journalist, host, and media entrepreneur. She is the founder and CEO of Mel and N Media Group, producing multimedia content for television and online news outlets, providing hosting, voiceovers, and news correspondent services and media consulting for travel brands and cultural organizations. Melissa has built a distinguished career in television news and digital media focused on the Caribbean region and diaspora communities across the U.S. and Canada. Her work centers on reporting issues impacting the multiracial internationally and developing and managing strategic content partnerships. She is known for her dynamic coverage that consistently highlights the underreported stories that impact the African American community and the Caribbean region. And Melissa is a contributing news and politics editor at Essence.com and Essence Magazine. And prior to this role, she traversed the Caribbean region as a television correspondent for One Caribbean Television, that would be CBS News, U.S. Virgin Islands. An experienced travel reporter and Caribbean expert, Melissa is a contributor to NationalGeographic.com, and her travel features and industry expertise have also been featured on LonelyPlanet.com, Trip Savvy, and Caribbean Beat magazine. Now, I could go on and on. I just have a paragraph and a half left. Her work has also appeared on NBCNews.com, HuffPost.com, and ABC News. A first-generation Guyanese American with over a decade of reporting experience, Melissa has made a proven impact at the intersections of media, entrepreneurship, and social impact. I have to read every single part of that. Couldn't leave anything out. Welcome to the digital world, Melissa Noel.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm like, okay, enough. You don't like to hear about yourself.
People don't like to hear about all their achievements, but I think you should. You should listen and absorb every bit and, feel good about what you have done.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yo, Melissa.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me on today. And I'm like, what's the story I have to tell? And when you sit and you think about it, there's a lot of things that I feel I can share, and I'm excited to share.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the work that you have been doing across the Caribbean, I think now more than ever, I'm just seeing you popping up. Like, I seen you were in Brooklyn with the King of Soca the other day, Mr. Marshall Montano.
Mr. Marshall, for sure. That was, Brooklyn was just on fire for that 40th anniversary show. And I think what it said to me is you not only saw the Caribbean community here come together, but you also saw just how we make sure you saw the marketing, the branding, you saw the entrepreneurs come out, and everyone wanting to be a part of not only the anniversary, but what it meant for Caribbean people, the Caribbean community, and for soca music. So yeah. It was good all around.
Yeah, and I mean, while you have, guys like Marshall, creating this history, we definitely need our own storytellers to capture these moments and put this out into the interwebs and the global platforms. And, you've been doing an amazing job at that.
Thank you.
So let's get this show on the road. So, as we start our interviews off, we like to get to know our guests and have our listeners at the Freedom Family get to know exactly who you are. So, Melissa, take us down memory lane and, just kind of give us the starting point as to how you even got into the world of journalism and media.
I love telling this story because it starts with family, right? I became a journalist because of my grandmother. When my parents migrated to the U.S. from Guyana, my grandmother moved along with them, and so I'm a New York born, a girl, a dual citizen life, between New York and New Jersey, Guyana. And my grandmother used to send me to this West Indian market in New Jersey to pick up the paper she used to get in Guyana. And I would go every week, pick it up, and then come home and read it with her. And the way I saw her still feel connected to home, feel connected to what was going on, whether it was the church, whether it was like Republic Day, it was like what was happening for Mashramani, whatever it was, just seeing her light up and still feel connected to home, I knew that I wanted to keep people connected to the world around them. And I felt like I could do that through storytelling, through journalism, because I saw how she still felt connected. I was like maybe 10 at that point in time. And it just stuck with me. And my parents were always very big on, the news and knowing what was happening. But just sitting down with my grandmother and reading that paper every single week, going to the market, a market I literally still go to this day.
Wow.
That really stuck with me.
That's interesting, Melissa. You say your grandmother. It's like the same thing with me with broadcasting and journalism. My grandmother, she did something when I was younger, when we went to visit her. She had an old cassette recorder, and she had these cassettes, and she used to put them in, and she was like, this is your activity today. Record your voice, tell stories, and I had tons of cassettes, like 90-minute cassettes, filled on side A and B with me telling stories all by myself.
Wow.
Something about Caribbean grandmothers.
Grandmothers. She put me to read that paper. I wasn't getting up until I read that paper. She knew what was happening, and that was like my reading lesson for the day. You know, like read this paper, know what's happening, and also like, you know, time with her.
Wow. So did you have to go to school for journalism? Was this something that you learned on your own? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so you know, I studied journalism in college. I went to Howard University in Washington D.C. Studied broadcast journalism, so HU, you know, and what I loved about Howard is it gave me the opportunity to dive right in. From my first year, I started off in radio, which is, you know, radio's the first love. So I hosted a show called The Island Hoppin' Show. On the student-run radio station WHBC 8:30 a.m. And then I went on to WHUR 96.3 FM, which is the local station there in DC. And it gave me the opportunity to delve right into what I loved right away. So at Howard, I did everything from, you know, I started in radio, went into television, interned and then worked at local television stations in Virginia and DC, did some stints on Capitol Hill. You know, it's like, want to go into politics? What do I want to do? And so I have a degree in broadcast journalism. And I went on and got my master's in journalism and international affairs, right. Because for me, I wanted that little extra. It's not required to go and get, you know, a master's degree in journalism. A lot of people might study history or, you know, do political science, business, something else, and then get a master's, or study something, study journalism in undergrad and then kind of continue. But for me, that was my path. And after undergrad, I went directly to ABC News in New York and started working the worst shift ever, overnight, midnight to 9 a.m. to kind of, you know, learn the ropes. And I did everything from write for news shows like Good Morning America, World News Now, produce news segments, shoot, report for abcnews.com. I learned what I wanted to do, and I also learned what I didn't want to do as well. And I think that's just as important. And kind of took it from there, but then things took a turn, and I'm sure, you know, we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You're hearing the story there from Melissa. For those that are unfamiliar with broadcasting and journalism, that's how you pay your dues. You get the worst shift ever. Most of the time, it's graveyard, and you have to become a general master of everything and every single topic that that the world could be discussing. You know, definitely.
I value that time.
How did you decide, and when were you offered your beat? And if you could explain what a beat is to the public.
Yeah, so a beat is like something you cover that is like your expertise, right? So someone might be a business reporter, their beat might be business, their beat might be sports, fashion, or what have you. And so for me, I was always taught that success in journalism meant, you know, making it big at one of the big news networks, you know, ABC, NBC, CBS, what have you, but that you had to, of course, start small and pay your dues. And so starting small was typically going to a really small station in the middle of nowhere and kind of working your way up. And honestly, I didn't want that. I saw something different for myself. I wasn't sure how I was going to get there, but my beats was something I actually created, because there are not, while you have sports reporters and international correspondents or what have you, business folks, you don't have Caribbean correspondents at most major news outlets. I can only think of 2 places off the top of my head, or maybe 1, that have dedicated Caribbean correspondents. And for me, while I appreciated what I was doing at ABC News, I learned a lot, right? And that's like, I even had the opportunity to go back there last week working on a story as an Essence editor. And that felt great. But I loved what I was working on, but I felt like I could be doing more. And I wasn't satisfied with only seeing stories about the Caribbean when there were natural disasters or when it was just something negative. I wanted to see more. I wanted to see culture and business and carnival and, you know, so many other things that I knew about, I had covered, or I just, you know, talk about in my day-to-day that I knew that we should be covering. So I decided that I would create it. And creating it meant leaving the security of ABC News, leaving the security of that, every 2 weeks you see that paycheck coming through. But I took a chance on myself while I was pursuing my master's. I left ABC. I went on to NBC News, but as a contractor, and I started contributing to an outlet called NBC Black and NBC Latino. So these verticals dedicated to telling stories about these communities. And what I did with that was build out this Caribbean beat that didn't actually exist, but I kind of, pressed on my editors there to allow me to tell these stories. So in the beginning, it meant, sleeping on the couches of friends or going to family when I was traveling through the region to get the stories done, because it wasn't in the news budget for me to do them.
Wow.
And then as you started to see the responses to the stories, then it was like, okay, Melissa, we'll let you do more of these stories. But I had to figure out the business aspect of things, because even though I had the journalism aspect down packed, I didn't have the business aspect down packed.
Very interesting indeed. We're speaking with Melissa Noel, international award-winning journalist, here inside the digital world.
So, Melissa, one thing I gotta ask, right? Because one thing I want to ask is the career that you decided to take, especially the route that you were taking, where you're focusing on Caribbean news, Caribbean culture, and it's not, predominant in the U.S. media. What was that conversation like when you were telling your parents, "Hey, this is what I'm going to do"?
Well, as to be expected. First, I was supposed to be a doctor, of course. Like, why was I trying to be a journalist? But then when I told them, they were like, wait, for them, I had already arrived, right? You're at ABC. Like, what is wrong with you? You're mad? Like, you already did what you're supposed to do. Why would you leave this job security? And so I had to explain to them that my work and my brand shouldn't be tied to a specific company, right? That what my goal was for my brand to be good enough and solid enough that it was about the work that Melissa Noel was doing versus that I worked for X or Y outlet, right? And so I think it took them a while to understand what I was trying to do. But once I started to do it and they saw the response to it, then they understood. It was like, okay, you're building a brand that no matter where you are, the stories are good. So people are going to read them. People are going to follow.
Right.
And you're doing good storytelling. But if I'm always attached to a particular outlet, then how do I grow me?
Right.
I think once they understood that I was trying to build my own brand and not necessarily be tied to a specific brand, then, they got on board. And then, of course, as those bylines started to come in and I figured out the money aspect of it, they were like, okay, you're all right. Like, I think she's good. We don't have to worry.
Right. And I mean, that sounds just about right. Now, you cover topics like race, immigration, culture, climate change, mental health. These are all polarizing topics to go down, right? Were you ever scared of the pushback, especially, coming from being kind of the first to kind of pioneer a lot of this content?
I think I had to put fear to the side a bit. I think I was a lot more conscious of the fact that, hey, I'm covering a community or communities that, I've grown up in and I know can be very critical, especially when it comes to like mental health. I did like this huge series for NBC a couple of years ago about children left behind in the Caribbean, where when parents have to migrate for job opportunities and known as barrel children. And that was a big series we did. And with mental health being so taboo, I knew that there was going to be pushback on that. Like, why you airing people dirty laundry? Why you bringing up old things? Those kinds of responses. But then I also knew that there was a bigger picture at hand, that who better to tell the stories than someone who has had so many of these experiences or can relate to them, but also has enough respect, right? And knows the nuances to do it with care, right? And to do it with that kind of conscious attitude to get it right and to take my time, and then to just make sure that our stories are in the room, right? Every time I sit down in a pitch meeting, I am that person. Melissa's coming with pitches from the Caribbean. Melissa's making sure we don't forget that we have to highlight certain things. And also when it's all hands on deck for some of those bigger stories, that my voice and the voices of our people are not being lost on, someone who's just going to parachute in for a day or two and then be gone, know? So I think for me, I had to know that there would be pushback on certain topics, but also understand that I have a bigger role to play, and that at some point you have to learn how to let those things roll off your back. And you start to see that people do come around and say, you know what, I'm glad you did that story. Right. Or they end up being the folks that follow your work most closely. So I think I had to just kind of develop more of a tougher skin there, and that's fine.
What do you feel like has been your most impactful story to date?
Oh, wow. I would have to say it was the Love in a Barrel series about barrel children in the Caribbean. What that story did was a couple of things. One, I got grant funding from a couple of major journalism organizations like the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting and International Centers for Journalists. And what we were able to do was work with Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown in Jamaica, the sociologist who actually coined the term more than 30 years ago, who's done so much work across the Caribbean with children and their families who are separated due to migration. We were able to help her get support and funding behind the Migration Studies Institute at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica. We were able to create a community engagement program where we screen films from filmmakers across the Caribbean about this topic, as well as connect families to mental health resources. Like if you are, let's say, a 10-year-old who was separated from your father or your mother for 8 years or 9 years, by the time you are reconnected in the sense that you're able to, let's say, join them in the US or Canada or where have you, you are 18, 19 years old, you haven't lived in the same household, you face some conflicts. So just kind of creating the opportunities for families to have those mental health resources, the counseling resources that they need when those reconnections take place. And then to also support migration studies with someone like Dr. Brown. And then we went to the United Nations and we got to present to the UN about, these issues that are facing people in the Caribbean who, they want to stay with their children. They don't want to leave them behind. But in the event that this does happen, what can we do to help families? So we presented at the UN, and we were able to present to stakeholders who were actually voting on migration policy. And it was the first time that the Caribbean region was included in those conversations, right? So I think that it went beyond anything I had ever imagined, hoped for. And, it's something that I still kind of talk about. I still go on shows and talk about it today. It's the research and the data is used in a lot of reporting. And I think it was really important, especially for folks like, Dr. Brown and other mental health practitioners who've been trying to rally support behind some of these issues. So yeah, I think that will always stick with me.
Melissa, now you may notice that you're hearing Melissa's voice cracking a bit. She's telling us this impactful journey, the story that she put out there, and she's getting all teary-eyed. I'm wondering, Melissa, these tears of joy, or was it for you a traumatic experience getting this story together, and how long did it take you?
The experience wasn't traumatic. I would say the experience was just very eye-opening. We spent about 6 months working on the series, and it was a whole team of us. I had a videographer, photographers, researchers, editors. We did a short a documentary in Jamaica. We were in Miami, we were in New York, and we ended up interviewing over 40 people for it. So it was, children, adults, caretakers, parents who had to leave children behind, social workers, psychologists, what have you. And I think I get teary-eyed because you just never really know how far your work can take you and the impact that it can have in a positive way. And it was one of those things that came out of me just knowing, you send home barrels all the time to your family and whatnot, but never recognizing that for some people that represented absence of a loved one, absence of a parent, and that there were all these people who had these stories to tell. And I just want to mention Lisa Harewood, a Barbadian filmmaker who did a film called Auntie, which was a fictional film about this phenomenon that actually sparked my interest in saying, hey, this sounds like stories of my cousins. This sounds like stories of the people that I know. And there's something here. And I've gotten to do a lot of work with Lisa Harewood. That community engagement series we worked on together. And, we've been on podcasts and shows and things like that. So there are just a number of really amazing people doing work and sharing those stories as well, because they're important ones to tell.
She said, Karen, she developed that story from a term that I've always heard, barrel mothers, barrel children, barrel fathers. And it didn't seem to have any sort of consequence for the families, for the family members, for the people of the Caribbean. In general, I'm just curious, as you've put that story out there and done the research, do you think it's a culture that has to change?
So I would say that, first I want to be clear in saying that when we did the reporting, we were clear in noting that there is no blame here, right? We know that the parents that do have to migrate do this with a lot of guilt, right? Because they don't want to leave their children behind. But sometimes it's like, I'm trying, you want to provide for your family, you want the best for your children. And that is exactly what these parents have worked to do. But in doing so, right, with the intent to do good and be able to do more for your families, what we presented was sometimes there are unintended consequences. And what we found and what we focused on in the piece were those mental health impacts, right? So feelings of abandonment, that lack of connection with your child, some of those issues that present themselves, children acting out in schools, what have you, and how it impacts that bond between a parent and child, particularly if a child is left behind in those formative years, right, as they're growing before they reach adolescence, that kind of thing. So I would say that, I don't want to be the one to say that this has to change, because I know that for so many people it's done out of necessity. But what I appreciated about the work of people like Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, who coined that term there in Jamaica as a sociologist, is putting tools in place so that even, because we know this is something that is going to continue to happen, but having tools and resources in place so that the impact on a parental-child bond doesn't have to be as severe, right? Or that the connections are, still kept, or resources for immigration so that you know how to handle the paperwork when you're trying to reunite or things like that. So having resources was the biggest thing that we recognized. There's a lack of resources and information both in the home country and then wherever it was that a parent and their children were migrating to. So connecting the two and just seeing the connection of the diaspora and how we could play into that to be a part of that, collective change or that collective village to support. So I think those were some of the biggest takeaways.
Just listening to you, I'm having flashbacks to my childhood, because growing up in Toronto, whenever we would go to the West Indian store, right, the West Indian store had an absurd amount of barrels. So we'd go, we're buying our oxtail, we're buying our seasonings from the Caribbean, and it's like, yeah, do you want to buy barrels too? And it never occurred to me when I was growing up, why the West Indian store, why I could buy food and there's a wide assortment of barrels, and it just all clicked.
Really?
It just all clicked. But let's shift gears a little bit, So,
Yeah.
Melissa, how did you even get started at your role with Essence and National Geographic? These are some of the biggest platforms that you can think of. How were you able to break into these platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I was a freelance reporter for about 6 years. And prior to this role, as you guys mentioned at the top, I was a contributing television correspondent for One Caribbean TV. But in all of the roles that I've done or I've been a part of, right, relationships have been the biggest thing for me. So having come from network news and been at NBC and what have you, I would pitching is the name of the game, right? As a reporter, like I pitch every single day. There's never a day that I'm not pitching a story. So I got really good at pitches, and just knowing that in the US media market, if I'm pitching Caribbean stories, I have to make sure that it's understood like why this story would matter to an American audience, or to make the connections for my editors.
Right.
So I got really, really good at making sure that I made those tie-ins to everything that I did. And so in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, when all of the racial reckoning was happening here in the US, I saw that, all these protests were happening after, George Floyd's murder. And there was so much going on. And of course, my sensibility is always to, well, what's happening globally? What's happening in the diaspora? And what does the Caribbean have to say, right? And so I saw these protests taking place in Barbados, in Trinidad, and Jamaica. And I said, what I saw in that is that the fight against racism is a Caribbean fight too. Mm-hmm. And I pitched Essence the story that, hey, like we're seeing these global protests taking place. Here's what's happening in the Caribbean. And it's so impactful because in Barbados, we saw them saying that we have to pull down these statues of colonial powers. They shouldn't be in Hero Square. We saw Jamaicans saying like, enough is enough. We saw so much. And I thought that was a really important story. So I pitched the story and I kept pressing on it. Like when it comes to pitching, especially major outlets, it's like, all right, I'll give it a little over 24 hours, sometimes 2 days. And then I'm going to pitch you again. Like, hey, just following up, making sure you got this, that kind of thing. So I pitched that story, did it. It went well. It went on to win a national award from the National Association of Black Journalists last year. And at the top of 2021, I started to pitch Essence a little bit more. And I connected with the former deputy editor there, Corey Murray, who's amazing. She recently left Essence after like 25 years. Wow. But I started to pitch her more regularly. And, I developed a relationship with her just as you have to develop relationships with any editors. And as I started to pitch them more, and, they accept more of my stories, I started going from maybe 1 story a week to 2 stories a week. And then when this role opened up, it kind of was just a natural segue into, becoming a contributor editor once there was a role open, just based on the experience I have had both as a reporter and an editor. So I've been in this role now for about 8-9 months. And I love the fact that not only am I getting to tell stories, but also help work on planning coverage, right, which is really important, and bringing that into that global sensibility. And of course, those sensibilities for Caribbean and diaspora storytelling.
Melissa, I have some colleagues in the U.S. too, and just like you, they may have been doing what was like the branded freelance work. And as you contribute more and more to particular news outlets, do you ever get tempted to get back into that secure role?
Most definitely. It's always there. And the pandemic made that, very, very like, oh my goodness, I need to make sure that this paycheck's coming every 2 weeks. But I think for me, what the pandemic also showed me was just how important having my Melanin Media Group was, because that was the time that I sat down and I like trademarked my first, series that I now I'm going to push forth to partner with a media outlet on, versus like, pitching it to them and they own, they would own the series. I think also what is really important in media and why I had to learn the business side of things is negotiating your contracts, right? So in everything I do, I try to make sure that if I'm developing a relationship with a news outlet, that after a certain point in time, we talk like an ongoing contract that not only gives them what they need in terms of coverage for a particular days or weeks or a month, but also gives me some flexibility to still do the things that I love, right? So that's, hosting and, being able to work for Essence, but write for National Geographic. And at the same time, do things like I work with, for instance, the Dance Grenada Festival that's coming up next weekend. I'll get to be in Grenada, serving as being in a communications role for that organization, and making sure that they get the kind of press that they deserve. So just being able to negotiate those contracts after a while is something I had to learn, but a really, really important part of like building that brand. Just being able to not only get the stories told and get them accepted, but being able to negotiate so that you can, have the flexibility to do what you need to.
We're talking to Melissa Noel, international award-winning journalist, here inside the digital world.
Talk is streaming at freedom106.5.com.
Melissa, I have to ask, Caribbean culture, we love our football. Who are you supporting for World Cup 2022?
I'm getting involved because I got myself in trouble last time I mentioned, so I'm going to be quiet and just watch like everybody.
Who you got in trouble with? Who could
I get in trouble for saying that I supported one over the other, and I'm like,
okay, so
nope, not going down that road.
So you just have to be a bandwagonist. Whoever's climbing the ladder, you'll just keep supporting.
I'm just gonna make sure that I'm tuned into the games. That's what I'm gonna make sure of. This toot. I got myself in trouble. Nice.
Karen?
Yeah, so Melissa, let's talk about, how Caribbean businesses can start, building their brands globally. Like, what are some of the things that Caribbean businesses can do to start earning international media attention?
Yeah, I love this question. And it's something that this is one of the focuses of my media group, like Melanin Media, is to make sure that businesses in the Caribbean and whether you're a small business or an established brand, that you know how to position yourself strategically to get press, right? And so a couple of things. One is knowing that, and I know this might sound like, well, everyone knows this, but I always have to repeat it, is that just existing is not enough, right? So just because you have the business or the brand is not enough to get coverage. So it's like, what problem are you solving, right? And how does what you're solving or what you're trying to solve, how might that be relatable to someone no matter where they're from, right? My biggest thing in my stories is people are going to care about it no matter where they are in the world, because not only is it a good story, but it might solve a problem, or even if it doesn't solve a particular problem, it answers some kind of need in your community. And that's something that anyone could relate to, whether they live next door or thousands of miles away. So what is your why, right? What is your backstory? And what problems are you solving, or what needs are you trying to fill? Or is there something that, or is what you're doing or trying to do something that will create something that people will need in the future, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a small business, it's not just about, it could be a t-shirt business, right? And that business, so many people sell t-shirts, but what is your why? Did you get into that business because of something you wanted to do with your family? Was it something that you wanted to teach your kids about entrepreneurship? Did you, are you the only person selling this kind of brand in your particular area? Like, what is it that makes you unique and stand out, right? And starting with your story. So people are invested in your story versus rather than, what the brand is first. And once they're invested in that story, then it's easy to build around that. So those are some things I always say, like, know your why, know your story, and also know like what problem are you solving, or what needs are you answering to, so you can be able to tell me like why this would make a great story, because people care about the story first, and then I think like the brand after.
Yeah, that is excellent. And I mean, you always have to have that angle and figure out exactly what problem you're solving. And what's crazy to me is that you get into business to solve a problem or help somebody achieve a desire. So it by nature, it's easy for a business to do it. But we have a lot of Caribbean businesses, for the most part, when they get on, just social media alone, we don't really try to solve problems with our content. We focus more on just hard selling, 24/7. And if you do get something that makes sense on social media, they might have hired an influencer to create a comedy skit, and that's about it, right? So does the media tend to look for stories in the Caribbean, or should Caribbean businesses, do they need to get adept at pitching themselves or pitching their stories to the international media outlets?
I think it's a mixture of both, right? You have folks like me who have that sensibility and are always looking for those stories, and I know how to make the connections, but not everyone is going to have that sensibility, right? you have to think about it in a way that no one may know my story, or no one is out here like looking for me. So this is how I can pitch myself, because I can tell you my inbox is flooded every single day with at least 80 pitches. Some I do not have the capacity to respond to all,
Right.
but people pitch themselves every day, and they pitch themselves multiple times because they understand the value of press and the value of getting a good story done in the press about your brand. So, and you don't need to just pitch for pitch sake, right? Like if there's nothing to pitch right now, or you're working towards something, that's fine. But when you get to a point where you're ready to pitch, you should look for the people that we talked about beats earlier, right? So look for the people that are covering that kind of beat, right? If you're reaching out to that business journalist, that small business journalist, or you're reaching out to that that publication or that journalist that might cover let's say, for instance, culture, and you have a business that's focused maybe on carnival or something like that, right? Look for the people that are already reporting on the stories, or the outlets that report the kinds of stories that your brand or your business would fall under, because that's that's part of the battle there, right? They're already covering what I want,
right,
or what I'm seeking to share with them. And then after that, I think it's a matter of, well, what is the story? Is the outlet you're pitching the right one? I know a lot of times people want the big outlets, right? The Essence, the New York Times, what have you. But I think sometimes the best things to do is to start small.
Right.
I started small. I started reporting Caribbean stories for like local New York City outlets. And then when they started to see my coverage in those, then I started getting some of the bigger assignments to go and do it. And I say that because that local news outlet piece, right, or story can give you the traction to get the interest of the bigger places. But if you're just trying to go to the bigger places, most times they want to know, have you been covered before? What kinds of things are you doing? So I think starting small and knowing that, hey, reaching out to that reporter or that outlet that cover those kinds of stories, getting a story or two, getting that profile piece done or that quick write-up is golden, because then you have something to show, a reporter like myself or another outlet. And pitching yourself is so important, but knowing what to pitch is even bigger than that. So when you pitch, knowing that there's a typical way we pitch, right? You have to have a great headline. What's going to grab my attention or a reporter's attention? Keeping it short and to the point, right? We always say like 200, 250 words, which is great, but giving me the who, what, when, where, why in there, but making it specific to something that we would want to cover.
Right.
So knowing those outlets, right? I always say it's great to pitch the Times. It's great to pitch other, maybe some other bigger outlets, but do they actually cover, or are they actually looking to cover this kind of story you're looking to tell? So knowing who's covering what is critical. I get people that pitch me because they know I cover Caribbean stories, or they'll know I'll be the person to pitch it and make that connection at an outlet. Whereas someone else might be a better fit for that sports story that you're trying to, get covered. So just kind of knowing that. And you can always tell the difference between the people who've kind of done their homework and know versus the folks that are just like, I'm just going to send this to everybody on this list.
Melissa, I'd like to just focus on the digital part of the news outlets just a bit. When people think Essence, Huffington Post, National Geographic, they do think about the traditional magazines that were printed. What would you say? Would you say that the digital platforms, the online platforms, have really helped push Melissa Noel out there for the community to know about?
Most definitely. Digital is king. I would tell you that, yes, we love our print work, and I am such a big fan. I'm that person that I still have all these copies in my home, but because of the way the industry has gone, like digital is such an important part of like my work and what my day-to-day is. And so those digital stories have helped catapult me into another phase of my career, just because of the amount of content that people consume online day to day. And then those social media pushes, right? You get that push from social is huge. So me being out there, letting people know that this is what I do, tagging the stories that I do, sharing them, and being able to connect with other folks who do that stuff or cover those kinds of things has been critical. So digital literally has helped me take it to another level.
Do you take a lot of effort, you use a lot of effort to push yourself digitally, personally, versus where the pieces that you're doing for the poster, for Nat Geo, for Essence, or do you just use that as the catalyst?
Yeah, I think you can never not promote yourself. You literally have to be your biggest cheerleader. And so while those outlets are major outlets and people know them and they're great, right? And I'm grateful for it. I think that not pushing myself would be a mistake. So with every piece that I do, I'm promoting it as if I created my own ad campaign for it. And I'm doing it across all my social media platforms. I create my own social strategy for myself to push my pieces because yes, we have our social teams and they'll push it, but I feel like there's no one that's going to promote it quite like you and the audience that you already have, right? I would say that the connections I've made with people across social media, sometimes they support me more than people I know, right? They'll push the stories, they're sharing, they're reading, they're writing to the editors to say, we need to see more of this. And I think that is critical, right? Especially if you're a small business or you are, you're building your global brand. It doesn't have to be, 15,000, 20,000 followers. You can have those 3,000 people, and within that circle or that circuit, they are literally helping you push your stories, but you got to put it out there, right? I'm always giving someone an action call in my post, share, let me know what you think, and we engage around that. And so I think in pitching stories to someone like myself or my colleagues, I think it's important to take the time. You may pitch, you may not hear back, fine. But when you find those people who are responsive, I'm the person I will take the time to say, hey, this is why this pitch didn't work for us, but it may work for someone else. Or can you tell me more about that? Because I think this might work better for our outlet. And I think that's really important feedback because a lot of times people are not getting that, right? They might just kind of feel like, okay, well, no one's responding to me. And it could just be that it doesn't work for that outlet at that time, or the news cycle is just crazy and you reach them at a bad week and it's all hands on deck for something else. So try again. And that's fine too.
That's a very, very good advice. Let's talk a bit about the art of storytelling. So what are some tips that you can give to Caribbean businesses to tell stories on social media and not just jump on social media just to hard sell everybody? What are some tips about, how do we create better stories online?
People love the process. So I think that behind the scenes content of how you do what you do, whether it's how, putting together your packages, working with your suppliers, a day in the life kind of thing. I literally did a day in the life feature last week with us, with a producer for a new series that I'm working on. And what we specifically wanted to do with the video was kind of give people the behind the scenes of this person's job, because people really care about that kind of content. So don't just sell me or try to sell whatever the product or products are, but also show me what it takes to get there, how you do what you do. And then people love to just know that you're being genuine, right? So even those hard days where things are not going the greatest, but how did you solve that problem or how did you bring the team together? People love that. And I always say there are great stories in that. So I love to pull anecdotes. I think anecdotes really work. Tell me a little mini story online about that, and that really draws people in. And I'll tell you, a lot of times we find stories that way. I know that we'll be looking online, and it's you'll see some post and you're like, hey, that's really interesting. We should reach out to that person. Or this person will make a great profile piece just based off of the fact that they were sharing their why, they were sharing their process, or they were sharing how they problem solved or what they did with their team. And we're like, that's a story.
Wow.
Literally.
Wow.
Literally.
We have so many different ways to communicate, right? And I mean, I know with your expertise in history, you have been able to do TV, radio, print, right? In this digital world right now, what medium do you think has, the most impact, or should everybody kind of be learning how to tell stories across the different mediums like podcast or videos or print? What are your thoughts?
I think that it's evolving so much that I don't think that there's one that's better or bigger than the other. But I think being able to maneuver across these different platforms is critical. I know for me, I'm continuously learning, right? Whether it's a new editing tool or it's just me learning how to do podcasts or just doing something different. I think learning how to tell your story across the board is crucial because audiences are segmented. We no longer have people sitting down at 6 p.m. to watch the evening news. They maybe listen to that podcast or they're streaming on their way home or they're in the gym or wherever. So I think meeting your audiences where they are, but not spreading yourself thin, figuring out what works for you. Like I know Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn are like my bread and butter, right? Like other folks, it's Twitter, it's IG, and it's like it's TikTok, right? So I know, like for me, what works, and for other places where I still need to grow, and that's totally fine. But knowing where your audience, you'll get those reactions, those page views, those follow-ups. I'm like, I'm gonna go there first. And something I know I need to get better at is just doing on my own, like my own page, my website, my content, my blog too, not forgetting about the stuff you created.
Oh, I looked at your website. I was very impressed, Melissa.
Oh, thank you.
Karen will be proud of you.
Mo, she knows that. She definitely knows, Now, as we're wrapping up on the hour, I had to, I need to bring this up, right? What was it like? Oh, no, it's no, don't worry. What was it like getting your first article published in National Geographic? What was that feeling like?
I have to tell you, I shed some tears, and I shed tears because I was very, very specific about wanting my first piece in National Geographic to be about Caribbean people. Like, I was very, very specific about that. The process was long and hard. I pitched National Geographic for about 5 months, back and forth, off and on. And of course, just because I'm, an experienced journalist and I've been in the game for a while doesn't mean that it doesn't take me time to get things done too, And I would say 2 things happened there. The news cycle was crazy. So every time I'm pitching this story, their attention is like, we have like the Capitol riots, this is happening, that's happening, whatever. But I just kept pushing because I knew that the right place for my Little Caribbean story was National Geographic. So I just kept at it and kept at it. And I felt so proud because that's the neighborhood that welcomed my parents when they migrated from Guyana. That's the neighborhood that literally helped me to embrace my, I would say like my dual identity, right, as a Caribbean American. And it's also the place that feels just so much like home. Right. So I really wanted, like for me, it was an ode to this neighborhood as well as also ode to the neighborhood, but also just shedding light on some of the challenges it's faced due to gentrification and just knowing that, people there are really trying to preserve the Caribbean culture that has been built over more than half a century. Wow. Like going to that neighborhood in Brooklyn, like you really do feel like you're in the middle of the Caribbean somewhere. And right. I love it. And knowing that there are people there like, Caribbean, which is the organization that spearheaded the campaign for it to be named Little Caribbean, Shelley Worrell and her team, just highlighting those people that do the work, the businesses that do the work, that have created this enclave, and the people who've contributed all these years. I really wanted that to be it. So when that story came out on the first day of Caribbean American Heritage Month in June, I shed some tears because it was one of those things that felt like, and somebody wrote to me about this, it was not just for me, it was for the community.
Right. Real quick.
Don't make me cry. Come on, man.
But Melissa, you've been crying in and out for this entire interview. But,
it's real. You guys can hear the passion. I only wish, listen, next time you come to Trinidad and Tobago, I hope it's Carnival 2023.
Listen, I'm coming for Carnival. Bible. I'm not missing. I'm not missing.
We definitely got to get you in the studio. We got to get you in the studio for part 2. So
I would love that.
Melissa, this was absolutely amazing. I know the Freedom family got a lot of gems. I know they felt the passion. Where can people find you outside of National Geographic in essence? Where can they find you, Melissa?
Yes, I am at Live from Melissa across all social media platforms. And then my website is www.melissanoel.com.
Yeah, I have to add in, I now got the name of the business, Melanin Media.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
right. Now I got Mel.
It's always intentional.
Yeah.
Always intentional.
I was like at Mel and but I get it now. Okay.
That was slick. That is some wordsmithonian stuff there.
Melissa,
I try.
Melissa, thank you so much for spending the hour with us inside the digital world, and we wish you all the best and hope we can reconnect with you very soon.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to being there in person in Trinidad soon.
Awesome. Melissa Noel, an international award-winning journalist, as she spoke with us here on the digital world.
Talk is streaming at freedom106.5.com.
So, folks, that was our episode with Melissa Noel. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you got some amazing insights. I hope your notepad was chocked full of gems, and I know that you're going to put them to use, right? So again, if you need to start, we need to start getting our entrepreneurs and our creators inside of these international platforms, and this is how to go about doing it, all right? So I hope this episode really shed some light on how to go about approaching international platforms so that you can continue to build your brand globally, all right? So if you enjoyed this episode, I want you guys to go and drop a rating. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you guys know the star ratings. Please drop a rating. The ratings definitely help grow the Digipreneur Film podcast family across the world. If you really enjoyed the episode, then feel free to drop a review. Reviews help me continue to produce high quality content and ensure that we stay on brand and continue to give you guys what you need to find success in the digital age, all right? So please drop a review. I read all of them. They definitely help me. They also help the people who are, maybe they're finding out the Digipreneur Film podcast for the first time, and they want to read the reviews to see if this is going to be worth their time. So definitely drop a review if you enjoyed the podcast, all right? You guys can also follow me over on Keron Rose, KeronRose, on all social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. I am most active over on LinkedIn, also on Instagram as well. You guys can always feel free to reach out to me. Check out the KeronRose.com website to continue learning more about building your digital presence and monetizing your platforms. And also, I'm going to be sharing a lot more stories about my journey of entrepreneurship and moving from Canada and coming over to the Trinidad and building my brand right from Trinidad, and how I've been able to do it across the Caribbean region and diaspora and in other markets. So I'm going to be sharing a lot more of my entrepreneurship stories on KarenRose.com, because in the new year, we're going to be rolling out the Digipreneur.co website, where if you're thinking, think entrepreneur.com or businessinsider.com, think that's what I want Digipreneur to kind of be in that space. And then Karen Rose is going to transition more towards, just Karen Rose, the brand, and me, the person, and putting up more stories. And a lot of the business content a lot of the written content and workshops and that will go over on the Digipreneur website. But that's a little bit of a sneak peek, a little bit of an insight as to what's going to be happening next year for me, right? Anyways, hope you enjoyed the episode. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.
You've been listening to the Digiboss, Keron Rose. We hope your notepad was filled after this episode. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. The learning doesn't stop, folks. And to make sure you don't miss any gems from the Digiboss, go over and follow him on all social media platforms at Karan Rose. Folks, don't just sit there with a notepad. We need you to implement at least one thing into your business before the next episode. That's the only way your business levels up. Thanks for listening to Digipreneur FM. Now go be great.